As your password becomes easier to remember, it becomes easier for hackers to guess. It's virtually impossible for humans to remember a complex password for every website. Fortunately for us, we have a trick up our sleeves: password managers. If you've heard anything about passwords, or if you've seen our full-length video on the matter, you know that you should really have a different password for every website that you visit. It should ideally be long, complex, and very hard to crack. But this presents a logistical challenge. How are you going to remember all of those passwords? Well, fortunately for us, there's an elegant and simple solution that can be even safer than your usual means of managing passwords. In theory, a password manager is very simple. What if you could have one password that unlocked all of your other passwords? What if you could have a safe that was synchronized across all other devices? And for most password managers, that's exactly how they work. You put all of your usernames and passwords into one list, and then you lock up that list with your mastered password. In the future, any new additional passwords get added to that list, and they'll be automatically filled in when you go to log in. They can even do this sometimes across different devices and locations. There are two different types of password managers: those that encrypt your password and store them locally on your device, and those that encrypt your password and store them in the cloud. Today, we're primarily going to be talking about those that get stored in the cloud, but generally things work pretty much the same. But you might then ask, how is that safer than never putting my passwords anywhere? How does a password manager work? There's no way that all of my accounts are safe when I have just one password. And you'd be right. That's why there are many protections, technologies, and algorithms in place that keep your password manager working seamlessly while also maintaining the highest security standard. So let's start with the first question. How is it safer to have all of my logins saved behind one password? You might imagine that keeping all of your passwords stored in your brain instead of putting them into a list somewhere would be leagues safer. And while in theory you would be right, it is really hard, virtually impossible, in practice to have a unique password for every website and have that password be something that is rigorous enough to withstand brute force attacks. You're either not using unique passwords for every website, or you're making simpler passwords so it's easier for you to remember them. Password managers are able to generate long passwords that would take longer than the life of the universe to crack. It also autofills those passwords in for you, so you don't have to make the password simpler to make it easier to type. This is also a security feature. It will never autofill the password onto a fake version of the website that looks like the real version. All you have to do is make sure that the password is a strong one, which is something you can find out all about on our full-length video on the subject. Additionally, for larger companies, keeping passwords out of individual user systems and on the cloud can prevent on-the-ground attacks. An example of that would be someone peeking over your shoulder at a cafe and getting your password that way. Sometimes these companies can even have password managers set up to only automatically fill out password forms, so never even showing the password to anyone on the other end. Okay, so keeping super strong passwords in a list is safer than the human brain, but how do I make sure that that list of passwords is safe? What happens if the password manager company I'm using gets hacked? Well, with how passwords are stored in these types of password manager lists, even if an attacker was able to access the database, they wouldn't be able to do anything with it because your passwords are encrypted. Without your private key, which is your master password, your password would just show up as random ones and zeros. Encryption like this is a pretty complex mathematical process, but essentially it works because there are operations that are easy to do one way but difficult to do the other way. In the case of AES, or Advanced Encryption Standard, which is one of the most used encryption standards that we have, how they do this is they will take the data that you want to encrypt and break it up into 4x4 chunks, and then various operations are used to shift, replace, or modify the content to take away any patterns that might give a clue as to what the original content was. Of course, since we need to retrieve these passwords later, we can't obfuscate them without care. We need a way to undo these one-way processes once the encrypted password list is safely in our device. Essentially, we need a way to decrypt. The trick is to alter that 4x4 grid using a key to ultimately end up with an output that is uniquely derived from the combination of the original message and the key. That way, nobody can undo the steps without first having the key. This is symmetrical encryption. Essentially, the key you use to obfuscate the data is the key you use to undo it. It's fast, relatively simple, and it can be used for large data sets. This is actually how all passwords work, or at least how they should work on secure websites. Think of encryption like this. Say you have a package and you want to send it to a friend, but you don't want to just send it in a box because then anyone could open it. So instead, you put that box inside of a safe. But once your friend gets it, they'll need a way to open up the safe, and you're the only one that knows the combination. So we've run into a problem now. How do we get the combination to the safe to your friend without just sending that combination in the mail? In the words of our password question, how do we get encrypted information, such as passwords, to the intended recipient, such as websites, but in a way where no one else can unlock it while it's on the way in transit to the intended recipient? You can't send the key to the intended recipient because if the attacker gets the key while it's being sent, they'll be able to unlock the encrypted data. With the symmetric encryption system that we previously described, there's simply no way that we can send the key used to encrypt data without putting the encrypted data in danger. So what do we do? Well, what we need is called asymmetric encryption. It's where the key that is used to unlock the file is different than the key used to lock them. This is achieved with a very clever system. Everyone that is a part of this kind of encryption has a public key and a private key, often also called a secret key. An individual's private key is, as it sounds, private to them, and the public key is available to anyone who needs to be able to encrypt and send data to that individual. So here's the trick. The public key is created from the private key in such a way that the operations cannot be reversed to get the original private key. But if data is encrypted from the public key, you can use the private key to reverse those operations. So in this way, that encryption is not symmetric. The key that we use to lock it is no longer the key that unlocks it, therefore asymmetric encryption. Most of the time, asymmetric encryption is used to encrypt and send the key used to unlock a full file instead of the full file itself. This is because asymmetric encryption is a much more complex algorithm and it's much too slow for the full size of a normal data transfer. That way, only the intended recipient is able to unlock the data and they don't need to have been given a key in advance. Because anyone may need to send a file without knowing the intended recipient in advance, say for example setting up a password when you register for a new website, everyone uses the same order of operations. But if the series of operations is the same for everyone, what's stopping a hacker from guessing and checking and doing these operations themselves? Even if the operations are nearly impossible to do backwards, what's going to stop a hacker from guessing a password at random, applying the same series of operations, and then comparing the encrypted version to see if it's the same? Well, these operations have been specifically designed to be fast enough that you wouldn't notice it when you're using it just on one password, but slow enough so that it's not reasonable for a hacker to go through the process again and again and again and crack your password in any reasonable amount of time. To give you some scale, if an attacker tried to brute force an encrypted password in this way, it would take 1 billion of the world's most powerful computers, more than the lifetime of the universe, to even have a small chance at cracking this type of encrypted password. So of course this means that a hacker is going to be more likely to try and guess your password to your password manager. So how do we protect ourselves from that? Firstly, and this should be the most obvious, you need a strong master password. We've covered how to do this before in the full-length video, so please go watch it. But a quick tip, pick 3 to 5 words, add in some numbers and symbols, the longer the better. Second, make sure that multi-factor authentication is turned on. We also have a full-length video covering multi-factor authentication, but for our purposes, it basically makes sure that you are the person unlocking your passwords. You should also make a habit of clearing your clipboard if you copy and paste your password. You wouldn't want to accidentally paste it anywhere, or worse, have a malicious website try and force your computer to paste without your knowledge. Password managers are a great tool to use to increase the security of all of your accounts while simultaneously making the process of logging into those accounts much more streamlined. Using cryptography and systems like the public and private key, password managers ensure that nobody, not even themselves, are able to access your passwords without first having the right key. Some password managers are even able to alert you if you've repeated a password or if they've detected your password in a password leak or data breach. This is very important because password managers can't unencrypt your passwords without that key, your master password. It's really important that you don't forget it. Some password managers do provide recovery keys, so in those instances, make sure that you write that down and keep it safe and secure. All right, that is it for this episode of ControlCase's Cybersecurity Simplified. I really hope you enjoyed it. As always, like, comment, subscribe. Feel free to leave any other topics you'd like to be covered, and thank you so much for spending this time with me.